backup system that you use?
All right, go ahead.
All right. So I'm Evan Zolkowitz. I work at Comcast. This is sort of a two-parter. First half talking about our range slicer plugin, and the second half is just sort of a update on ATS, things from the last summit that people might want to know, interesting talks that happened, stuff you might want to go research later. So for our range slicer plugin, all the actual work for this was done by Brian Olson, who's back there, and a lot of the original work was done by Jeff Bevel, who's also back there. So the current state of range requests and caching, you have, with no extra help for things like ATS and Nginx, the caching proxy will run off and fetch the entire asset from the beginning, and it'll serve it once everything is cached. So this is bad if a client leaves, so the fetch cancels, new client comes in, starts over again, either nothing gets cached or it takes forever to cache, and yeah, it doesn't work out too well. Some options are background fetch, which there's an ATS background fetch plugin, plus the background fill settings in ATS, which an incoming client will kick off a fetch request, and even if the client leaves, ATS will continue fetching it in the background. And with the background fetch plugin, you can also fetch ahead of time if you want. And clients can also range request off of cache data once it's stored in cache. So it's bad in this instance because a client can come in before the fetch is completed and still leave empty-handed, and you end up with large assets sitting on single stripes in cache. So it's pretty inefficient. And it's also bad just for speed and eviction. You can't spread it across multiple caching tiers, things like that. So some current solutions, we have the cache range request plugin that's built into ATS, where each range request basically turns into its own cache key. But this only really works for well-behaved clients who know how to block their requests on specific boundaries. There's mpeg dash, but that relies on the origin doing all the pre-processing. And that's only really valid for audio and video. You can't do it for things like software updates and downloads and sending out updates to cable modems, things like that. Nginx has had a solution for this for a couple years now, and our original solution for range requests was to use ATS in concert with Nginx. So this is an example of the first solution that we did, where the client would come in, do a request to ATS, that would get forwarded to Nginx, and then it would send its properly blocked range request back into ATS to use the cache range request plugin to actually cache it in ATS. So you can see the remap line here, where it goes to the third-party example loopback. We used a TS Glue plugin to handle some oddities of those client requests. And then it would exit out of Nginx, come back in to the second remap line to go onto the cache range request. So we came up with a plugin solution that will break an incoming request into multiple byte-aligned cacheable blocks, and then reassemble the block content into client responses. And you can also tune the block size to whatever you see fit for whatever content you might be serving. And it'll work for basically anything, audio, video, software, updates, whatever you need. The implementation is pretty much based off of what Nginx had published a couple years ago, where we only make GET requests, and when in doubt, we just grab the first slice block to grab any headers to figure out sizes and things that we're going to store along with each of the subsequent requests. In general, ATS plugins are usually designed around one-to-one requests, and this sort of breaks that, where this plugin sort of acts as its own origin server, intercepting the request and doing all the transformation on its own. So you can see this is the standard diagram from the ATS documentation, and the bad part about doing a plugin like this, you lose a lot of the state machine access within ATS with cache management and conditional requests and parent handling and things like that. So that's why we end up still using cache range requests to actually handle the caching in order to get some of that back and proper handling of all the blocks. So the data goes to the cache range request plugin after having gone through the slice plugin. That handles the parent interaction, the block caching, conditional headers, and everything else that ATS is usually good at. And it's been proven in production, so we don't have too much to worry about actually using it. So since Slice is taking over all of the duties that ATS normally handles. It has to handle any error conditions like requesting past the end of data, server aborts, block errors, client timeouts. It has to do a lot of extra work since it's taking over the duties that ATS usually handles. So as a comparison, you can see the first set of remaps that we had before with Nginx, and the second one there is using the Slice plugin. So it's basically just a standard remap line that now includes the Slice plugin, specified block size parameter that we want to chop it up on, and then it goes off to the cache range request plugin to actually be cached. So it's a lot simpler, easier to understand, easier to deploy, easier to maintain. So the way it works, it runs through that matched remap rule, and the Slice plugin takes over, makes a virtual connection back into ATS per Slice block, and it grabs the pristine URL using the internal ATS APIs. And that runs through the remap rule again. During the previous step, it inserts a header so that way it knows that it already went through the Slice plugin once. So that way it's already been properly aligned on proper byte boundaries. So then when it comes back to the remap rule, it knows it's already been sliced up properly, and it can just be passed on to cache range requests for caching.
Is that per slice?
Yeah.
Okay.
So some of the issues with it, though, cache invalidation, the first block, its headers are used for all of the headers for subsequent blocks. So if for some reason you wanted different headers on different blocks, you can't really do that with this plugin since it just inherits whatever the first block had. And calling back in ATS is a little inelegant. Some other plugins use it as well, throwing junk into headers to let itself know that it's been here before. It works. Brian, I believe, has some ideas on how to maybe do it without this.
We're sort of doing this for edge geo-blocking as well. We're doing it a little differently,
Okay.
but it's a similar thing. That's why I like, yeah.
So it's out there. There's a pull request. You can use it right now if you want. So I don't know if you guys have any questions on this.
I actually have one more. We got, so one case we had was where the connection would abort midway through, and the clients were getting a 200, and some of the data. Would this end up like if that did, because I saw one of the cases was like, oh, you run out of, connection drops midway through. Would this end up sending an error code, or would we have something misconfigured that's causing this to happen? The cache not to just send to 502?
Yeah, I would think you would have something misconfigured.
Okay.
So, and if it's like a larger request, this might help that. Because then you could cache at smaller values, basically.
Okay.
So I don't know. Any other questions on the Slice plugin?
You have it running in production?
We have it running on one cache right now. It's been running out there for a long while, though. So it looks like it works. We want to deploy it more. Just takes time to deploy things.
See also my comments about how to slow down.
Yes, mostly that. So on to some ATS updates. The fall summit this time was at LinkedIn in San Jose. So they're changing the release schedule. They want to have no more overlapping non-majors. The previous slides and roadmaps, you would see overlapping like 8.1 and 7.2. They're getting rid of all of that to avoid confusion. Some other things to notice here is that 7x's sunset period actually starts around May of next year. So it should be time to start looking at 8x and upgrading. There's also been requests from the community if other people could really help out testing. There's not enough testing going around. Not everybody can do it. Most of the conference this time was attended by Yahoo and Apple, both had really strong showings, and then Comcast, AT&T, a lot of other people were there in smaller numbers. Coming up with ATS 8, they introduced TLS 1.3, proxy protocol support, which comes with HA proxy. So Steve might be interested in that. That's where it injects the original client address into the TCP header. Lua config is completely removed, and they added in YAML support for logging. You need C++17, so you have to reconfigure your build environment.
Just to clarify, the Lua thing means that the configuration of ATS with Lua is removed. The Lua plugin
Yeah.
is still
Right.
good to go and everybody loves it, right?
Okay.
I just want to make sure we all know that.
Yeah. Yes, there's still Lua JIT. Well, you have to use the Lua that's on your system, whether it's Lua or Lua JIT, whichever you choose. I'm pretty sure that got pulled out of the actual ATS build. So,
But the Lua plugin has
Right.
just been promoted and it's good to use.
Okay. Am I using Lua config in 5.2? No. Yes. No, I guess not.
No.
All right.
Lua
The
can,
config's gotta go
So I
away.
just skipped over it.
the logging Lua config came in 7.
Jump on the YAML train. You can go from 5 to 9.
So they removed a couple of the config files and traffic cop. They added a couple new plugins, FQ pacing that I believe Eric from Cisco wrote. They added URI signing that Chris Lemons wrote. They brought in traffic dump, which is a tool from Yahoo that I'll cover a little bit. Changed around a couple APIs and changed around a couple of the usual parameters that you probably should check their upgrading document when you go to 8 just to double check anything you might be using in your parameter fields. So as I said, there's a bit of a call for help for testing. At this point, it's hard for both Apple and Oath to do 7x testing. Apple's going strong, moving on towards 8x, and Oath's production is a really customized version of 7x, so it's hard for them to test current release versions. So people out there could go to a more recent version of 7x to help with some testing, or start looking at 8x for testing. That'd really help out the whole community. So some of the talks, LinkedIn discussed their workflow. They take input remap requests via their Jira, and they generate a config in YAML. They have a custom build tool that takes that and verifies their configs. And then they start deploying out to their whole staging test and test production tools. They have custom ATS code that they use to pull down from a Git repo to get any new configuration values that they need. So sort of different workflow, at least from what we use. So probably different from what a couple people out there use. Facebook discussed their edge wall, where they actually use eBPF as a firewall for a lot of their infrastructure. It avoids using IP tables, which can be expensive, and you can actually write C-type programs that get loaded into the XDP location in a lot of Nix drivers, and you'll hit these programs before they actually even hit the kernel stack. So they use them for load balancing and limiting earlier than even hitting the kernel stack. And they can load these at runtime, and they also get verified at compile time that they won't crash the actual drivers, so you're guaranteed you can write a program and won't take down your entire NIC and not be able to do anything. So it seemed fairly interesting. YAML is coming. So ATS 9 will have full conversion to YAML config files. So as of right now, we would need a lot of help in traffic control to convert to full YAML. Hopefully that will change with some help from Apple. AMC is also working on a canned YAML project where you can make a JSON schema and it'll actually output verification code and parsing code automatically for you, which could help with CI issues and things like that. So if you have any questions, you can ask Randall. He's the YAML guy. Oath discussed run root, where you can do sandbox ATS installs. You can specify a layout for a full install in a YAML file, and it gets verified in traffic layout. And they actually use this for deployment and testing and development, so they can have multiple versions installed in different locations on boxes and easily deploy them. I think they just package everything up into a TGZ and just deploy it as that using a layout file. So, discussed OpenSSL 1.1 and 1.1.1. Brings in major performance gains, so trying to go to that. Yahoo discussed open sourcing their session reuse plugin and crypto proxy. So the crypto proxy is a completely separate open source project where it handles OpenSSL jobs on behalf of ATS, so you can actually offload all that to a different server. The session reuse, they share session information across a Redis cluster so they can hand off sessions amongst all their servers.
TLS session.
Yeah.
Pretty sweet.
So these will actually be open sourced into a separate repo from ATS.
That session reuse is specific. There's two ways to do session resumption, right? One where you share a secret on the servers, and then the client caches the session ticket, and then you tries to reuse it, and then you can validate on the server that the session ticket is there. What they're doing is the other option, the older one, where you say the server is the only one that has the session ticket key, and that's why they need to use the Redis database to share these tickets across all the members of your cluster or whatever.
And the session reuse plugin is fully hosted in Travis. So it's going to be part of the
Okay.
part of the still.
Apple discussed Voluspa, which they will discuss again in an hour, so you can hear all about it then. Covering some new plugins. There was a prefetch plugin. It uses pattern matching to schedule consecutive fetches of future requests. So if you have very predictable content, you know that I get foo/1.ts, and then I'm going to need 2 and 3 and 4. You could actually use this plugin to go ahead and prefetch all of those objects and have them pre-cached before anybody else comes in. So Apple uses this to warm up cold caches, and they saw huge hit ratio increases.
So
they could basically-
just to reiterate what it does, it recognizes certain patterns in the URL. And it goes like, oh, you're getting fragment number 3. I'm going to get 4, 5, and 6 for you as well. And you can configure how it does that. And I know we've always shied away from that, or you have always shied away from that. But it may be interesting to look into and see what kind of performance, and what it does to performance. It's open source, it's free, and maybe interesting.
Specifically for video on demand, not linear.
Just, yeah, linear would be kind of silly to do it because you're going to always get ahead of yourself, right?
Yeah.
But for video on demand, it seemed to help quite a bit at Apple, what they were presenting.
Our setup is also slightly complex, but it's probably similar to how you guys do it. So what's happening is that we have a number of layers of caches. So a client can come into any one of these front layers. Like it can be 16 and a pop or whatever, right? You hit any one of those 16 machines. You don't prefetch into those 16 machines, you prefetch into the next layer. So the first layer talks to the next layer, and that's consistent hashing, right? Saying you need to prefetch fragment number 3 and 4 as well. So it's pretty efficient, and then the second statement there, to cancel requests, it makes a huge effort to make sure that we don't sort of land in some sort of a feedback loop here where the system starts fetching shit that no one wants, right? So when he knows that the client has stopped paying on a particular screen, he goes through hoops to make sure that you stop all of these prefetches as well. You can't have a prefetch trigger another prefetch.
Yeah, and especially if you start doing multiple tiers, you get an origin protection layer in a DC type thing. It may actually be something that's really useful.
Yeah. It doesn't work with cache promote at all.
For sure it does. That's the whole. Otherwise it wouldn't work for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think actually I had a feature to cache promote to say if the request is an internal request, then you can bypass cache promote, and this is treated as an internal request.
Cache promote is heavily used.
I mean, it would be really sweet to have an analytic system to say if there's 1,000 fragments of this moving at the top bit rate, is there a 92% chance that we'll meet all of them, and if so, it's just let's just fetch the whole thing?
Create Markov chains of requests.
Yes. So he doesn't do that. He only tries to stay. I don't know how many fragments it stays ahead, but
You can set that. It's configurable.
a pretty small number that we
Yeah,
use.
I think 3 is common.
Right. And what we notice is that very few times where we end up discarding things, and in almost all cases, the caching ratio on the second tier in the hierarchy went way up, close to 100%. Just for good.
So is this a plugin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess it's for you guys, it would be really interesting as well.
Yeah.
That kind of says on the
Yeah.
internal
And this is already out
But
there.
we have something like this, but I don't know exactly how it works. This looks a lot more like this looks a lot better than like what we have is basically you just define content and it'll go get it. But it's
No, this is dynamic.
This is
It-
dynamic,
It'll
yeah.
just see, oh, look at what you're doing. I'm going to help you out a little bit and prefetch some of this.
So it's just like I recognize that this is a digit incrementing and it tries to do the same thing. It doesn't dip into the manifest.
It has
You give it, you basically give it a regex, and that says if you're doing this on the regex, and look at this little thing, and starting.
Well, we talked about adding other features like link rel, stuff like that, or having the origin saying,
Yeah.
here's the response for this particular fragment. The next fragment is this particular URL. Then the plugin can look at that, for example.
Right.
So then it becomes a chain.
the packagers usually will just increment some number.
Yeah, I know that, but
But it could
until
be-
they change that
Well, but
scheme
you
and then
need
you're
to know.
screwed.
Because like if you're, I know that if your bit rate changes, then something above, like if there's like an upshift or a downshift, then something in the middle of the URL will change. So you do need the regular expression.
How do you
It's
guys handle that?
It's
Because you don't want to
it's
fill your
only deals
cache
with
full.
it only deals with that bit rate that you currently fetching.
Yeah, I think
If you
so.
switch bit rate,
Yeah.
then it starts over again. But that's
It would need to, because the
Right.
different bit rates are different. There'd be
Well,
different hash keys.
But then this kicks in,
Okay.
right? It stops doing the prefetches on the previous bit rate unless it's another player for it. And then you go over and start doing prefetches
So-
on the immediate.
Another thing to keep in mind too is that as bit rates shift up and down,
Right.
you can't assume that the keyframes are in the same
Right.
alignment as well, because you may have lower bit rate feeds with different length keyframes than.
I'm not saying it's a slam dunk, turn it on, and all your cache problems are going to go away. I'm saying if you do a lot of video on demand, it's maybe something you want to look at.
What about the wasted cache on that could occur as a consequence of all of bit shifting? Like lowest bit rate right at the tail end of a movie, probably unlikely that you're going to be at the
So
low
that's
bit
why
rate
you only go
unless
3
it's
ahead of a client.
3 ahead of the client.
That's what we said.
Okay, good.
3 ahead of any client that's going on. But like I said, it's not a slam dunk.
No, the
some
3
real
ahead
thinking
thing,
you
that
need to do.
makes perfect sense. I was just worried you would have this unbounded
No,
thing that would
no.
run to the end until
And
it's
it
a
has,
404.
it has a response of 3. Like
I mean,
it
it's
is
hard
at
to
some
tell.
level incrementing some
So you
power.
learn your lessons.
Okay.
So the option that we used to do is we actually ended up warming the cache
Yeah.
on some of these sort of mega caches. We would say, let's go and fetch all today's new movies down to these mega caches, sort of super parents, whatever you want to call them, right? And then they were always in some region of cost. And then you know, so everyone knows half of those movies right no one watches. And it's a huge waste of time and it was unreliable, it was difficult to assure that the prefetch would happen, right? So you missed a prefetch on Star Wars, the next Jedi, whatever it is, and then you get screwed, and then you have prefetched all this other stuff that no one cared about.
Right.
And in this case, this sort of eliminates all the need for anything prefetching. It generally works really well, and I think we're really interested to see other people use it, and maybe even because it is fragile in the whole way how it needs to look at the URLs and figure out what's the next fragment. We even have some projects internal where that might
Because
not
they can
work
screw
going
with
forward.
it and completely, but a lot of times you can, this is, you can talk about this forever about how it won't work, but 80% of the time it's going to make your shit better. Just
Right.
use it.
Yeah, take the
So that's
80%,
what
move
I'm
on.
saying,
But we need to see something like, say, looking at the HLS playlist, right, and extract information out of that.
yeah.
That would be really neat.
Those
Like
manifests
keeping the
aren't that
manifest.
hard to read.
No, really not.
Anyway,
Well, okay.
sorry, I totally derailed it, but I thought
Yeah.
this was worth extra discussion.
So Lua JIT FFI support, you can call external C functions and data types, just like the regular Lua FFI if you had the full Lua. And they're also adding support for full Lua instead of just the Lua JIT. So for those of you out there using a ton of Lua, could be useful for you.
What was the, does anybody remember what was the delay again that you incur when you start Lua? You did testing, Comcast did testing in the beginning of that, we were talking about that. Remember that?
30 milliseconds.
That's what I wanted to say as well, real life was like that. No, it's every transaction. Adds it onto every transaction.
That's a lot.
We need to do that testing again because I kind of felt like it was 30 as well. Do you remember, Chris?
Texas,
I don't, I remember it being high. I
Yeah.
don't remember.
That we because part of the problem with the way the Lua JIT plugin works, the Lua plugin works, is that it tries to be part of the whole event system and how configurations and stuff are mapped into coroutines. And we have had this discussion many times where I feel we can do one of two things. One is to move the Lua plugin to be a first-class citizen of the ATS core, meaning it's embedded into the core in a much better way. So if you start an HTTPS state machine, right, and part of that you get a Lua context that's already there, and it's just fast. Or we can do something like the Lua script testing where we simplify things. Maybe Lua doesn't have to be all the complexity of continuations and coroutines and all that stuff. But which part of the problem is it does a lot of setup and teardown that hooks into all sorts of hooks, because it doesn't know if the script is going to need it or not. And there's a lot of overhead in doing those setups and teardowns on every transaction, regardless of what if you're just doing, say, set the config variable to 5.
Yeah.
So I think if Lua is something that we should move forward with, it would be one of these sort of working groups that would be really interested to sit down for a couple of days and see which path should we go here to make Lua a better
I think
citizen.
it'd be awesome, and I think it is really, really handy. And with performance, we should do everything in it.
I mean, Lua did this fast, but it's the whole sort of integration with ATS through the C API that makes it really slow, I think.
It's like C2.
Moving on, we had the Magic plugin, which integrates image magic support into ATS. So base 64 encodes just the full image magic command line parameter in a query param. So you can do anything you can do with image magic right inside ATS and cache whatever the result is. So at first, I didn't think we even had a use for this, but apparently we do. So it seems pretty handy.
Jeez, I'm back.
Oh, no way! Oh my god. Did you talk to them about
That
it?
was the first thing we said when we heard about
I
it.
didn't think about that at all. Whoa.
See, we got cool projects too.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
good thing you're at Apple now. We got this under control.
weird. Well,
So Oath discussed their traffic dump, sanitize, and certify collection. So the traffic dump, they can do replay testing where it captures ATS traffic into a JSON file, and they can do sampling on it, and it contains timestamps and headers, and they actually do replay to replay, so they can verify outputs. Pretty handy stuff, and they're open sourcing all of that. They have a sanitizer tool, so they can clean up their output, so in case they have to hand off logs, so they can remove IPs and metadata and things like that. And their certifier, they can either auto-gen or load up a list of certs from disk. And they actually use this in their data center because they were forced to have a black box object that they didn't particularly trust, and so they used this to be a man in the middle and spy on the black box in their data center. So could be handy if you need to do some testing. Next up, we had a next hop discussion, which John will cover in his presentation next. And finally, one thing to watch out for was something we saw in production that it seems like not many other people have seen, but just be careful. The Lua logging in 7x, we started getting a lot of crashes basically because it couldn't allocate memory to actually parse the login config file. And this caused a ton of crashes for us. So there's a pull up, and I'm pretty sure it's merged in already. So if you're going to go to 7x, make sure you move up to a version that has this fixed in there just in case. So you guys don't lose a whole bunch of your servers.
To have it.
Yeah, something like that.
So any questions, further discussion?